Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Joining me again today is Brad Thorpe. Brad is the founder and inventor of Isophit and is my go-to for anything relating to isometric exercise and isometric strengthening, which, as you may know, I'm a huge fan of and huge advocate for in strength and conditioning, rehab programs, and so on. So today, Brad and I are actually talking about isometric exercise in a different lens, different light. We're actually looking at it more about the cardiovascular health side. So we talk about things like blood pressure and that sort of thing. So a lot of great content in this one, especially with a lot of individuals coming to me with questions about heart health lately. Highly recommend you give this one a listen. Enjoy. Brad, welcome back to the podcast. This is third time now, I think, if I'm counting correctly here. It's good to see you again.
That's great to see you. It's the second or third. It's always good to talk to you. So if it's not the third, we'll have a third.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's plenty more where this one came from, but for people who might not have heard the last ones, or maybe they're not familiar with you and who you are and that sort of thing, would you mind filling them in real quick about who you are and all the amazing things that you're doing up there with Isofit and that sort of thing?
Well, my name is Brad Thorpe, obviously. I am the inventor of an exercise product called Isophit, which is a pretty unique device to do isometric-based exercise. So I think I'm up to 24 different patents on it. Some would consider me the global expert or global leader in the subject area. Outside of that, I'm a father, a husband, a dog owner, all those good things. But with Isofit, man, it's been a wild ride. We're now in 33 countries. We have over 380 clients, which we call family members, and that consists of the U.S. Army, the FBI, the British Royal Navy, 20% of the NBA, and a whole host of like little therapeutic clinics down throughout the U.S. and over in Europe. And it's been a remarkable ride, for lack of a better word. So that's who I am. That's what we do. We're helping a ton of people.
And I'd imagine if groups like that, the ones you just mentioned, Brad, are using this device, it probably works pretty darn well, because I've noticed like the military and professional sports teams, they don't usually use things that aren't effective.
That's what I hear anyways. It's pretty interesting because one of the things when you start to explore where isometric exercise and strength training really come into play, it touches upon all aspects of being human. Right? It's like how we're currently sitting at our desks right now. We're being held together isometrically, right? So for all the office workers out there who may be going, hey, I got neck pain, back pain, shoulder pain, I might have some obesity issues. I might have hypertension and high blood pressure. Well, we can help all of you within, you'll notice a difference within probably about a week or two. And, where you sort of say, hey, does it work? The results kind of defy logic until you put your head in the research papers. And there it's clear as day in the research papers. It's just people just don't usually read them.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to your point there, Brad, I think we need to, we've started to see this shift anyways over the past few years of looking at exercise as a medical modality or exercise as medicine. And, we can dose it in certain ways, kind of like we dose medicine. It's going to have an effect or, whether that be a therapeutic effect or a side effect, just like medicine. So I like that concept. And as you've mentioned, exercise, especially isometric exercise, can go a long way in promoting overall health for an individual. And kind of like we've talked about in our past podcast episode, I know we talked in detail about the importance of exercise for health of individuals, especially athletes. A lot of times we get so caught up in the performance realm that we kind of forget, like, hey, these, guys and gals, they're people too. And, we got to keep them healthy.
Yep. And when you take the NBA as an example, obviously each one of these guys who makes this league are absolute specimens, but that's 450 people. Out of a population of 320 million people. So I think if we as a collective, because everyone's striving always to be, hey, we work with these athletes, these athletes, these athletes. The impact that isophit is having on the general population, to me, just blows my mind. It's, and we talked about this a little bit on the last episode, but, I'm working with guys with LVADs, so which is a left ventricular assist device. So they don't actually have a functioning heart in their body. They have external pumps that circulate their blood. So like little things like that, where it's like you get to work with that population, the stroke population. Like we see extraordinary results with basically reconnecting the functioning brain to the muscle structure, so it increases their stability and it gets rid of some of their pain. And when you look at that, it just can inspire a lot of hope to a lot of people, and which is truly kind of fantastic across the board. And recently, it seems like this week alone, I've talked to some of the world's leading golf instructors. So we're now basically getting into the eyes of the golf performance world, and it's like, wow. Last week was basketball, and I'm off to an NHL preseason training camp tomorrow to work with 40 NHL hockey players for the next week and a bit. And it's pretty remarkable how you go from therapy to performance training to rehab to preventative health care and, realistically improving the quality of their lives. And that's how broad stroked isometrics is.
Yeah.
Because,
Definitely, yeah. As you mentioned, improving quality of life and preventative health care. One of the hot topic things I continue to see in the news lately, I don't know about you, Brad, but it seems like a lot of people are concerned about cardiac health, whether that be the different cardiac events that we're seeing in athletes and individuals acutely, or, hypertension, all these different, cardiac events essentially are very buzzworthy and trendy right now, I'll say. And I think that that's an area where, at least from what I remember from our past conversations in the literature, isometric exercise can really play an important role in reducing, cardiovascular risk profile and managing blood pressure. I think it's, I'm going to go off the top of my head here. You had Carlson, Bedrav, and Inder, I think, were three of the main blood pressure articles that you referenced in your 118 reasons to use isophit folder that you sent me. I don't remember what year those come out, but I remember that there was a lot of literature supporting isometric exercise for managing blood pressure and reducing your overall likelihood of different cardiovascular risk factors. Does that sound right?
Yep, it is true. And a lot of that research stems from a guy named Dr. Ronald Wiley, who was an Air Force research scientist. And this is going back to way, way, way back, like old school back, 1969 back. So what they did was they basically hired or commissioned Dr. Ronald Wiley to see if he could elevate blood pressure in fighter pilots who, in order to qualify for fighter pilot school, you had to be kind of pre-hypertensive. Because what they want to do is be able to withstand more G-force, so gravitational force, as they go through their turns and their different flight tactics. And what they found within a couple days of using an isometric based protocol, which was squeeze the joystick or the control stick with your non-dominant hand. Because you usually use your dominant hand for the all the different other controls. And what they found was within a couple of days is these guys who were pre-hypertensive and they wanted more tension, like more blood, higher blood pressure. They noticed a decline, which was an epic failure, not good for that specific purpose. Now, subsequently, he went on a 30, 40-year sort of research tirade, for lack of a better word, and, ended up discovering and creating a protocol where it was basically using a grip strength dynamometer. So basically this thing you would squeeze with your hand. And the product that eventually came out was called Zona, Zona. And what it was basically a prescriptive model that you could do isometric exercise with just one arm. And what you would do is you would squeeze that dynamometer. And, if you want to save a ton of money, just get a tennis ball and squeeze a tennis ball. And what it was the protocol was 4 repetitions, times 2 minutes, with about, a minute and a half, 2 minutes rest interval. So the committed time on the day was 12 minutes. And they'd recommend doing that 3 days a week. And what they figured out was basically better than a single pharmaceutical agent for lowering your blood pressure. And this is going back, and there's a ton of literature in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s on blood pressure and isometrics. But somewhere along the way, it was deemed contraindicated, meaning that if you have hypertension, you shouldn't do isometric-based exercise. And, one of the devastating effects of hypertension is, two of the major things are heart attack, and the other one is stroke. Now, the funny thing is with stroke patients, or I shouldn't say funny, the irony of most stroke patient recovery training protocols. So when they had hypertension pre-stroke, they were told not to do isometrics. Once you have your stroke, one of the first things they recommend is isometrics, which makes no logical sense, but it's so good for neuromuscular re-education, and it's safe, it's easy to perform. So you have these people who had basically a rupture within their artery or vein in their brain, and then now it becomes safe to do isometrics, which is a little bit interesting. But one of the things that because it is really right now, it's probably the biggest buzzword in, call it, preventative health and cardiovascular rehabilitation right now. Because about 3 weeks ago, there was a study released by the British Journal of Sports Medicine. And his last name is Andrews, and a bunch of other guys. Pretty sure it's Andrews. But what they did was they basically did a deep dive, so a meta-analysis, and they used 270 papers. And there was over 15,000 participants in the combined studies. And what they determined, so it was a comparative analysis, and what they looked at was isometric exercise, so 3 different modes of isometrics. So they looked at a wall sit, a leg extension, and a grip strength dynamometer, like a grip strength exercise. They compared that to what they deemed combined training, which was resistance training and cardio training. They broke that down into cardio training as well as resistance training. And then they compared it also to HIIT training, so high intensity interval training. And one of the things that they found out was the effectiveness of isometric exercise pretty much crushed the other modalities. And they have basically an effective scale that they sort of looked at in this model, and isometrics was 98% effective, where the combined training was in and around 75-76%. Getting into resistance training, cardio training, I think, was 41% effective, right? And this is the gold standard for, hey, you got heart stuff, go do cardio training. It should work. Well, it's not very effective. And the literature will show that over the last 40 years as well. And then HIIT training, which you think of that high intensity interval training, that was the worst. They were like 39%. And you look at that stuff and it's like, okay, somewhere along the way, people have just pulled in the wool over everyone's eyes. And it's like, hey, heart health. Oh, that means you got to do cardio. Where it's like, well, no, it doesn't really work effectively. I mean, are there benefits? Absolutely. I'm not here to say that there's not benefits. However, if you do have hypertension, there's just a much better option, and that would be isometric exercise. Now, the literature traditionally compares 24 minutes a week of isometrics, right? So 3 days, 8 minutes of total exercise time, versus 90 minutes a week for usually 3 to 6 months. So you got 6 weeks versus 6 months, 24 minutes a week versus 90 minutes. So that's your typical cardio sort of test. And it's just significantly greater. So it's more time effective, it's more efficient. And to be honest, it's a lot safer to perform isometrics for individuals with hypertension, or new to exercise. And there's a lot of people out there, obviously, who are hypertension, who also are suffering from metabolic conditions like obesity. So it's like, okay, well, maybe putting that person on a treadmill for 90 minutes a week puts that individual with obesity under a little bit of risk of maybe back pain, hip pain, knee pain, ankle pain, because they're not accustomed to walking for 90 minutes a week. And, therefore, those rotational forces and the compression forces might be just high risk for that individual, leading to a negative outcome or a negative experience, and they just don't want to participate anymore. So
yeah. What do you feel like is the main mechanism or main driver behind isometric exercise being such an effective tool for managing blood pressure?
My opinion, and this is still to be, confirmed by science, so let's look at it that way. But when you just think of it logically, it's clear as day. So normally when you're looking at your circulatory system, you have to think about the components of it, right? So you have your atrial side, which consists of your heart and your arteries and your capillaries and stuff like that. And, then how does the blood get back? That's your venous, right? So venous return, or the venous side of the equation. And if I look at the total blood volume in most humans, it's about 5 liters. And 35% of that blood volume is in your atrial side at any given one time. 65% is in your venous side. And the atrial side, you have your heart and it ejects the blood into that region. And that's great. And, obviously you want a working heart. But when you're looking at sort of the venous side, well, it's a muscle pump. So it's like 99.2% controlled via muscle function. And if you can look at it that way and sort of say, hey, well, if I want to improve the efficiency of this entire system, well, I can either A, focus on the 35%, or I can turn my direction and turn my focus on to the 65%. And when you're looking at an isometric-based exercise, so isometrics have the ability to sort of increase the activation rate of muscle tissue up to around 100%, where traditionally dynamic exercise will activate the tissues to about 88, 89%. So we're basically looking at a way that we can strategically engage muscle tissue better and more effectively to help with the return flow of blood. And you can also think, so you take that and you put that over in the column of sort of, yay, this is a win for isometrics. But you also have to think about the natural tone of muscle tissue, right, which is more of an isometric in nature than dynamically. And when I can increase that tone, it also increases the contractility of tissues. So if I can increase the contractility, let's say it's the muscle of your upper arm, right? Your tricep, your bicep, your deltoid. There's a muscle in there called your coracobrachialis as well. And obviously your rotator cuff muscles. So if I can increase the contractility of all of those tissues, I'm going to have better levels of compression at my glenohumeral joint. Now, if I lack compression or it's under a specific amount of laxity, you have to think about that artery coming out, that brachial artery coming down the arm. Well, if I put that under stretch, right, because I don't have the same compressive force, well, that artery is going to narrow. That artery is going to also thin, right? So the diameter decreases, the wall thickness decreases as well, so it becomes less compliant, more risk of, having issues or also having plaque buildup, right? We always hear about narrowing arteries as being a relatively bad thing, as well as associated with hypertension. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. So if I can increase the diameter of the artery or vein, and it's near instantaneous, it takes like 1 or 2 sessions before you can actually see that increase in wall thickness and diameter. So that takes away some of the peripheral resistance that your heart and your blood pressure is going to have to be placed under. Right. So you look at all that and it's just like, oh, okay. Well, none of that seems complicated, and it's not. You can prove it in a physics-based model, just looking at flow dynamics. If you put, I don't know if you have brothers or sisters or anything like that, but I remember as a kid, I would put my finger over half the end of the hose, and it would change the velocity of the fluid in there, and it would shoot out, and you could attack them. It was wonderful. imagine if that's going on internally, right? So all of a sudden you narrow the artery a little bit, so the pressure has to go up, and let's put a little bit of a plaque buildup in there as well. And, now you have all these vortices and all these sort of things that augment blood flow, within your circulatory system. So
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's funny you bring up the main driver being muscle contractility, because I was recently talking with a vascular surgeon about, we're looking at individuals who just present with a lot of swelling post-operatively. And he was saying, we were talking about the value of just basic, seated calf raises or ankle pumps and that sort of thing. And it's amazing just how getting a muscle to pump and getting a muscle to fire, just repeated compression, relaxation over the the vasculature from the muscles can really have a substantial effect from a pumping of fluid standpoint. And then it's the matter of you stop and think, hey, if I can increase the strength of this or the compressive force of this exponentially by just holding, not even moving, or pushing or pulling without movement, I think that really holds value to our clients and that sort of thing. So that's huge. I would also say on top of that, you mentioned the simplicity of isometrics and that we only need to achieve 24 minutes a week. I mean, the dose that's needed for this response is very minimal. And I'll also say that I feel like the intensity that's needed is very minimal. You talked about squeezing a tennis ball. I think that anyone or almost anyone can squeeze a tennis ball for 2 minutes. And it's not like, white knuckle grip we're talking about here. It's just you have to exert some kind of muscle force for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, and their research ranged from 10% effort all the way up to 100. And their sweet spot is usually around sort of 60 to 80%. So don't kill yourself. Now you can also look at it in the sense that you could use it to get a little bit stronger. So you would need a more intensity. So if you go to the sort of 60 to 80% versus the 10 to 30. But, if you're just starting out, start out with the 10. Give yourself permission to sort of say, hey, we're going to start a journey that I've never done this before. And one of the things so the CNN reported that, the study that we previously mentioned, and they basically, CNN had it, BBC, a whole bunch of Australian sort of newscasts. It even got translated into Danish and Swedish. I both had articles sent to me. And one of the things that they sort of recommended in the article, and this was the research, but it was basically 4 repetitions times 2 minutes of a wall sit. And, I just want to put a massive warning with that. A wall sit for 2 minutes for most people who regularly exercise without blood pressure issues is challenging. It's a high risk scenario. So you look at that, and also within the CNN article, they also put a plank, which wasn't mentioned anywhere in the literature. So I think what they tried to do, without actually talking to the author of the article, was just give a level of familiarity, where it's like, oh, what's isometrics? Oh, it's a plank and a wall sit. Well, it's virtually any muscle or exercise where you just contract for a period of time without actually moving. So there's a lot safer exercises to achieve these blood pressure results than both of these exercises. However, the plank or the wall sit was the one that was determined to produce the greatest level of result. But there are other ones that are significantly better. In my opinion, what I've seen in practice over the last sort of really kind of 15 years of using isometrics for individuals with blood pressure issues. But one of the things I just do want to put that big, huge warning out there. If you do have hypertension, if you are new to exercise, if you are carrying a whole bunch of extra body weight and mass, 4 times 2 minutes is not where you start. That is a place where you strive to get to over maybe a couple months of progressive loading, be it isometric loading, where, you start maybe with 4 times 30 seconds, and that's on the high side. And start there and learn to allow your body to adapt to these new forces and these structures, not structures, these exercises. and rule out the risk factor, because obviously if you have hypertension, there's a risk of stroke. So, and you very well might be medicated. Now, here's the other warning I want to put out there to the population. If you are medicated and you start doing isometrics and you're doing it daily, you may no longer need that same level of dosage. You will feel lightheaded in about 2 weeks. You may need to reduce that dosage. You may also need to get off your medication over the period of, several months. So it is highly effective, and it should be also come with significant warnings. Don't do too much aggressively at the beginning. And it is highly effective at lowering your blood pressure to the point you may not need that medication any longer. And normally in the world of medical practices, there's no exit strategy once you get on your blood pressure medication. This is an exit strategy. It will lower. We see it all the time. I get medical doctors who do isometrics and, have reduced, if not eliminated, their blood pressure medication. And that's also, once again, medically recommended. Don't just listen to Brad, monitor it the whole time, but put that warning in there that sort of says, it's actually really effective at lowering my blood pressure. One of the things that you have to always think about with your blood pressure, just get it monitored. We talked about those kids who are dying prematurely. Like there's a kid the other day who's 17 years old, just dropped dead on the basketball court. LeBron James' son, had an episode. Most young athletes don't have a clue what's going on with their heart. They don't have a clue what's going on with their blood pressure. When I was a young athlete, so when I was 19 years old, I was diagnosed with blood pressure as 150 over 100. And that was my resting blood pressure. So well into the hypertensive category. I was an athlete. I was at school at a volleyball scholarship. I exercised about 6 days a week. But what would happen when I would exercise, my blood pressure, so that diastolic number, which is the bottom number. So if they say like 120 over 80, so the top number is what would be defined as your systolic, right? So that's the amount of force exerted against your artery wall when your heart is contracting. Diastolic is the amount of force exerted against your artery wall when your heart is relaxing. So my number was about 95 to 100 consistently. But when I would exercise, it would drop into the low 40s. So you would look and you go, there's Brad lying on the ground again, because I would pass out. So, so I was one of the lucky ones where it's like, okay, I'd go through these experiences of blacking out, and this was way back in the, late 80s, early 90s. So what did they do? Well, they put you back in the game. As opposed to now, you got medical teams rushing you to hospital and to figure things out. But subsequently, I figured out I had what's called preventricular contractions. So my ventricles don't fire properly. I get a lot of backflow in my heart, and my blood pressure drops significantly. Now, with isometrics, I was able to lower my blood pressure after about 2 weeks. And that was after 14 years of trying to figure out what it was. But once I implemented it, it took me 2 weeks. And I've never looked back, and that's 15 years ago now.
It's amazing how something so simple could have such a drastic impact. And, I love your point too about the importance of understanding, hey, what is it that I'm doing here, and can I really handle it? Because as you mentioned, 2-minute planks, 2-minute wall sits for 4 sets on top of that. That's going to challenge the best of us.
It's bordering on negligent, for the majority of the population. So it's like, well, let's not take something that has the potential to be super healthy and help a ton of people and put a prescription that's going to leave a negative sort of taste in their mouth so they don't participate, they don't do it. And that's traditional to what we do it traditionally in the exercise industry. Right? We make it too hard. We make it so people, I think 80% of the American population does not have a gym membership. Why? And you look at that and you go, well, they either have negative experience. It's not about the funding, because you can go to Planet Fitness, it's $10 a month. So they don't see the value in exercise. Now, the interesting thing is the 20% that actually do have gym memberships, they go less than twice a week. So what is wrong with this industry that we need, nobody's wanting to participate in it, no matter what they sort of say. Hey, numbers are up. Yeah, numbers are up. There's plenty of room for growth. Maybe let's produce a better product that helps more people and is more inclusive to a training perspective. Like, let's teach people how to contract muscles first before we tell them to move. Because movement, well, guess what? It virtually injures everybody that participates in it. And that's, for you, I guess technically you're a physio, and, you're telling me the other day that I think you have 15 people with ACL injuries that you're dealing with right now on your roster?
It's about to be 16 tomorrow, believe it or not.
To me, it's a testament that you're awesome. So let's look at it that way, in being able to help rehab people and get them back to playing and return to play and stuff like that. But let's get them to you before they tear their ACL.
It'd be nice, in a perfect world, but it's that goes down a whole rabbit hole of, can we prevent every injury and different things like that. But on that topic for a second, I think a lot of people are familiar with the ACL injury and, the operative process. And if not, we have great podcast episodes on it, or at least I think they're great. But, afterwards, one of the first things I reach for is an isometric exercise. It's literally just quad setting, literally squeezing the quad. And we dose that in the form of hundreds to thousands of reps every single day. And, that's probably the most important thing. It's a very low intensity thing, but we're doing it at a very high frequency. And it's isometric in nature because, I'm sorry, but sitting there squeezing a muscle is not going to have really any concentric, eccentric moment to it. So that's one of the first things I reach for. And it has great impact. And, some people might look at that and they might say, you know what? I don't think that's going to do enough for me. I think I need to go right to the wall sit. And, to your point, we kind of have to walk before we run. We have to progress and work up to things. And if I can't even just sit there and actively squeeze and engage a muscle, then, am I ready to progress to the, phase 10 progression of it when I'm not even mastering step 1 yet? So I think there's a lot of value in mastering the basics. And that's what I like about isometric exercise as well, is you can scale it up or regress it back very, very easily. In the past, we've talked about HEMAs versus PEMAs. If I'm doing a PEMA type isometric, like pushing into the wall or something like that, I can push really, really light, or I can push really ridiculously hard and create 100 different levels of scale, all by just changing how hard I push in about 2 seconds.
Thing is, you can also be pushing really hard and keep pushing till it goes really, really light, right?
Yeah.
Based off, so durational you can look at as well.
Yep.
One of the things that I've done a lot with rowing athletes specifically, and you're sort of on the East Coast there, so Head of the Charles over in Boston is a big, huge rowing regatta, and we used to do like 50 1-second pulses. With one of my rowing athletes, who was a 3-time Olympic athlete, 6'6", 225 pounds of just ungodly awesomeness. And what we would do is, his race is 5 kilometers, so 5,000 meters. And what we would do is we would do 19 1-minute deadlifts with about a 5-second rest period between. And then after we did that sort of level of abuse, we would then do 50 pulses at 10 through 90 degrees and 10-degree intervals. So you're looking at 450 repetitions, at a 1-second interval at max exertion. So we went from what would be deemed isometric strength endurance to rate of force development, or isometric rate of force development. So he could help with power development as well as the sustainability. And the one of the things that I always want to get out there to the audience that listens, isometrics is probably the safest and most effective way to train your tendon structures, right? And there's over 4,000 tendons in your body. Most people don't know that. They don't think about it. But tendons, what they do is they transmit force between the muscular system and the skeletal structure to either prevent or create movement. So if you have some slackness to that or weakness to that tendon structure, your performance goes down. Your risk of injury goes up. Your risk of poor health goes through the roof. And the reason for that is if you think about how your lymphatic system circulates lymph, it's 100% controlled via your muscular system. So if you have muscles in your body structure that don't work properly, you're going to have some sort of, toxic cesspool of waste that you're not circulating out of your system very efficiently, right? And I'm going to say that's the onset of inflammation, which then leads to potentially things like cancer, right? And I know that's, people are like, oh, if you do isometrics, it's going to prevent cancer. No, if your muscular system fires better and you circulate lymph better, maybe that's a thing that you need to look at. And, being healthier in all accounts reduces your risk of things you don't want. So,
yeah, in general,
little tangent.
Improve your state of health and well-being. And, I think that's the kind of thing that can really have a positive impact and start a little bit of a movement too, Brad, is, I think when one person starts to do it, someone else will be inspired to do it as well, and I think that's the kind of thing we need a little bit more of in today's day and age, because as you mentioned before, our studies and our numbers and long-term projections on health outcomes are not looking good. I believe there was a paper published about a decade ago. I might need to look and see if they did an updated one that said, over 95% of Americans are going to be overweight or obese within the next 20 years. And it's like, that's slightly concerning for me to, look at that number and see. And it's like, hey, if we just start with some of these simple, basic things that can have a drastic impact, who knows what kind of long-term implications we can have here.
Well, exactly. And those are the things. And you really got to, look at it and go, well, where's the money in people being healthy? You follow the trail of money, and it always comes back to, well, if you're sick, we can make a ton of money from you. If you're healthy, we can't make much money from you. Because I was asked today, it's like, well, if isometrics was so good, why isn't everyone doing it? Well, there's two factors. One, ignorance to the subject area. And two, well, they're invested already in all the machines that already do dynamic exercise. And with, some of the equipment manufacturers out there, well, people have existing intellectual property or patents that they can't work around. So until they can sort of generate revenue from it, they're not going to promote it. Why would they? It's just bad business to sort of say, hey, steer the consumer dollar elsewhere. But you look at when you go to a gym as an example, look at how many treadmills they have. And why do they have that many treadmills? Well, because somebody can hit start and walk and not bother them. They put a TV there, they'll stay there for an hour. But walking, and now this is kind of interesting, walking is the leading cause of hospitalizations amongst seniors because they fall and break their hips. Or they injure themselves, they tear an ankle ligament or something to that effect. And it's like, okay, well, maybe if we help these individuals prepare for walking better, and the stats on women and fractured hips is over 50% over the age of 50. So you will most likely, as a female, you will fracture your hip and require some sort of surgery before, the time you die, which is just a staggering amount. And you look at that and you go, well, could an isometric help with that? Well, if that tension or that upregulation of tension in the muscle structure pulls on that tendon, and that tendon transmit force into that bone, and that tendon actually forms the outer surface of the bones called the periosteum, well, just maybe that bone's going to get stronger. And so that when you're looking at the periosteum, the only place when you're talking about skeletal bone that you don't have it is usually at the end, at the joint surface, right, where you have hyaline cartilage. So that way you end up looking at that going, okay, well, if I can increase my isometric tension or force regulation, I'm going to have stiffer tendons. I'm going to therefore have stiffer tendons pulling on bone more frequently at a higher rate. And we need stress on bone to lay down all the tubercles, not tubercles, what's the word I'm looking for? Trabeculae. And so once we have that, you look at that and go, okay, we can make bone stronger with isometrics as well. So it really, where we sort of started the conversation, it has this ability to cascade across all areas, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a general pop, whether you're in a rehab situation and or, wanting to prevent a rehab situation.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right about that, Brad. And in general, I feel like we've covered a lot in the way of discussing the various benefits of isometric exercise, but really honing in a little bit there on the cardiovascular implications, as you mentioned there. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything that we didn't quite address in regards to isometrics and cardiovascular health and some of the other various benefits of isometric loading?
It basically, first, I looked up the author of the study. It's Edwards, not Andrews, what I said earlier. I knew I was wrong. So one of the cool things, it actually helps with cognition. So they say. Clearly, I dropped the ball on that one. But when you're looking at isometrics, it's just a safe way to start exercise. And what we need to start to focus on is if we want to sort of reach a larger audience with exercise, we need to be doing isometrics. It's safer, it's more effective, and it's more efficient from a training methodology. So that way, what people can end up doing is having a positive impact initially with exercise, as opposed to saying, "Hey, I don't like it. It hasn't worked for me. Every time I do it, I go hard. I end up injured." We just need to approach it differently because exercise is the magic pill that helps everyone get better. It's just we dispense it at the wrong dosage, and a lot of people do get hurt by it. And more so, they have such a negative experience with it traditionally that they don't want to do it. It doesn't matter that they know it's healthy for them. It's just like, whatever. I would rather be unhealthy than, go into a gym environment that, makes them feel uncomfortable, makes them feel vulnerable, or, in some cases just makes them feel kind of dumb. And it's like, we need to change that approach, I think. So
no, I completely agree with you. As you mentioned, it's important to have a good, healthy relation with, exercise, which is a great means of taking care of yourself, taking care of your body, arguably the best way to take care of yourself, and really just take charge of your overall health and health status. And the better your relation with improving yourself, from a health standpoint, I think the better the rest of your life becomes, at least in my opinion. For people who want to find out more about you, isophit, maybe they want to check out, your devices and, possibly purchase one themselves, where can they find you at and where can they find out more info?
So website is isophit, which is ISOP as in Peter, H as in Henry, IT.com. So isophit.com. And I prolific on Instagram, so I put out a bunch of stuff on Instagram every day. We do put out a daily sort of blog post. We sort of call it the upskill, really kind of newsletter. And what it is, it's a daily post on isometric exercise and how it can sort of influence a specific subject area. Like today, it was basically, how isometric muscle contractions can reduce eccentric tissue trauma in athletes, so that way the athlete can basically show up on game day prepared and being able to not be as injured or as sore, which is a very, very common element within sport where the athletes, they play so frequently. What they often do is they take rest days, but during that rest day or even pre-game, they should be doing isometrics to enhance that neural connection. So stuff like that, if you're interested in learning more about isometrics, as I said, I put out something every day. I don't tag you all the time, but but it's we get very positive feedback. So that's pretty much it, man.
Yeah, well, if you're going to want to keep up with me on social media, Brad, you're going to have to rejoin MySpace at this point because I'm trying to bring that back in 2023.
It was before. Well, sorry, it was around during my time, but I was already onto Facebook. So lived there since 2008, I think. So Anyways, dude, I
It's
appreciate. I love your podcast. I love what you guys are doing. Your guests are incredible. I got a couple of guests I'm going to send your way. They're pretty prominent individuals in the world of sport. So, I got some great things lined up for you as well, just from handing over some of our isophit audience, because it's growing and people are jumping on, sort of, let's call it the bandwagon, if you will. And it's, as I said, every day it's just remarkable how we just grow and grow and grow. And we got some unbelievably exciting news that I can't divulge yet. But I can guarantee you every person on this podcast listening knows who this person is. And they just bought a ton of isophits. And they're going to expand throughout the US, and pretty awesome. But anyways,
I love the sounds of that, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that very soon, Brad. I'm going to link to your website, your social media accounts, all of that sort of thing in the description below. Maybe the OnlyFans too. I'm
going to start a foot fetish thing. So, I was talking to my wife about that. She's like, I can do that. I got nice feet. I'm like, but I got Fred Flintstone feet. Like, I'm going old school on this one. Like, I'm going to basically get my sort of, what do you call that? Leopard, outfit. And then stuff like those primal guys.
Yeah, so. There you go. We'll link to all of that in the description below. So that way, if people want to check out anything from the isometric devices to, pictures of your feet, maybe we'll have all of that there for their viewing pleasure, we'll call it. So always a pleasure, Brad.
It is very good. We'll link it to your flexor hallucis longus and how that increases jumping performance with an isometric.
I like it.
There you go, buddy.
I'm here for it.
That study too. We'll talk to you.
Hey everyone, I want to take a second and tell you all about AliRx. AliRx is a at-home food sensitivity and gut health testing panel. You order online and then receive and complete your test at home for food sensitivities. You then receive a custom report online through your member portal, and then receive personalized recipes and supplements that are catered to you based on your food sensitivities. If this is something that interests you, you can check out the link and description in my bio, and you can use the coupon code capital D, capital B, RAUN, capital RX, so D Brawn RX, at checkout to save yourself 20%. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to share it with a friend, subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, and leave a review. This way we can spread knowledge and motivation and help reach more people. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.